15 minutes of discussion on education. I'm sure all members on this side, and of course on this side in the spirit of camaraderie and love, would want to wish my colleague, the member for Oropouche East, a very happy birthday on a significant milestone that may God continue to give him good health and happiness and success for him and his family. So happy birthday, our member for Oropouche East.
5-0. I'm concerned with education.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, before we took the break, I was speaking about the cuts in the allocations for the schools, the secondary schools and the primary schools, and together there was $61 million reduced in the grants for schools. Now that will seriously affect the upkeep and the maintenance and the infrastructure for these schools. So these boards will be left to suffer a lot, particularly the assisted primary schools and the assisted secondary schools, and of course Lovell Junior Life Center. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I had raised the point that in the draft estimates of development program, page 80 of the yellow books that we were given, in 2016, the estimate of $559 million was for development program. But the revised estimate was $374 million because they did not spend $185 million. I was indicating to both ministers of education that they should look at this area critically, and rather than not being able to complete what they were seeking to do, this money was available under the budgetary allocation, and therefore they could have done a lot more than what had happened. And as far as the infrastructure, I mentioned the area where we had close to about 70 plus schools under construction. We want to ask the government to continue with these schools construction. We have 44 early childhood education centers, and 18 are with the IADB. We have 23 primary schools under construction at different stages, and close to about 7 secondary schools, including St. Joseph, Mount Hope, Barataria, a part of Pleasantville, Siparia East, and I want to make a special plea for the Shiva and Parvati schools to be continued. The Honourable Member, the Minister of Planning, indicated that there was difficulty in terms of completion of the required approvals. And we ask that she seeks very quickly to have these approvals completed so the schools could be completed. And Mr. Manning would like to see, God bless his soul, he would have liked to see the completion of the Pleasantville blocks that were being constructed. We built about 3 or 4 new Pleasantville blocks during our time. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the budgetary allocation to education and training in 2016 was $9.763 billion, and today it is $7.22 billion, $2.54 billion less, a 26% decrease. And that is a significant decrease for any area, Mr. Speaker. We understand and appreciate the necessity for cuts, but the government has to determine the prioritization. And the Honourable Minister, instead of coming here and telling us that we waste, mismanagement and corruption, 15 months later, should seek not what happened in the past, but what we need to continue to do for the future. The people are sick and fed up. They are sick and tired of hearing this present administration, this Rowley-led administration, the Honourable Keith Rowley-led administration, talking about the past and past. The people have rejected that. Move on to the future and see how you can continue to improve the different sectors under your administration. And I'm speaking particularly today about the education sector. In 2016, the estimates, 2017, the book on draft estimates of recurrent expenditure for tertiary education, current transfers and subsidies, page 5. Decrease of $569 million, a reduction in current transfers and subsidies. You know who have suffered as a result? Direct University Services, $22 million. Council of Legal Education, $10 million cut. Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex, $15 million cut. Subsidies to Mount Hope students, $19 million cut. The National Trading Agency, $18 million. UTT, $107 million. Laventille Technology and Continuing Education Center, $10.6 million. Honourable Ministers, We applaud your program for the Laventille enhancement program. We are in agreement with it. And we are in agreement that such a program should continue throughout the country where schools have problems. And if that is successful, continue it throughout the country. But why are you reducing Laventille Technology and Continued Education Center by $10.6 million? Seek a meeting with the Honorable Minister of Finance and get back your money so that the students in Laventille who are not doing as well in the academic work can move into the mainstream of technology and so on. The Accreditation Council of Trinidad and Tobago had a $3 million cut. MIC, which is the Pleasantville Technology Center, 5.8. MIC, which is a craft program, 12.7 million cut. Tobago Technology Center, 2.2. MIC 0.14, 3.5. Retraining of displaced workers, 7.3. The Trinidad Hospitality and Training Institute, 7.1. You cut $21 million from HYPE program. That's a program that the PNM administration speaks about as one of their brainchild. But why are you cutting your own program that you started? Why are you doing this? Because this helps a lot of the students who are not being taken care of in the mainstream of the education system. The MOS program, you cut $28 million in the multi-sector skills training. So I'm, through you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm seeking to ask the two honorable ministers of education to look into that and see how they can rectify these situations. Serval training, 6.9 million cut. My part, 4.7 cut. Point Lisa's apprenticeship program, 5.6. The OJT, 20 million cut. So you have, and then decreases MIC, YTEP, 49 million cut. NESC, 27 million. NEHRS, 4 million cut. IMA, 3.8. The advanced nursing program is cut completely, only 300,000 given, so it's abandoned. The medical postgraduate program, only 500,000 is allocated for postgraduates. We need more and more specialist doctors in the country. Spend some time in the scholarship program and see how you can help them. And the UWI South Campus, what is happening to that? In 2016, 43 million was allocated, only $9 million was spent, and construction has almost stopped, although the building works is 70% completed. The UWI Open Campus in Chaguan has had an allocation of 30 million. Very, very little was spent. Why don't you complete these programs? The UWI School of Dentistry, 15 million was allocated. Well, I'm satisfied that that is completed. The Tamana E-Tech Park, 72% is completed already. 100 million was allocated in 2016 under the IDF, and the project experienced delays, although $2 billion have been spent, most of that by the PNM administration. So, honorable members of this House and honorable ministers of education, you need to look critically at these areas and see what remedies you can bring to the hardships that you'll be creating to all these institutions, which we are very proud of. I want to just speak about another area, the CAC. Honorable ministers, the Ministry of Education, that's a continuous assessment component. In the first work done in 2012, December, the Ministry of Education said there's certain of the value to be derived from the CAC. And extensive training program was conducted in all the CAC subject areas for standards 3, 4, and 5, and based on the prescribed curricula to be delivered. We had done a revision of the primary school curriculum. You say you want to do it, but that has been done already. We revised the early childhood education curriculum. The last PNM administration, before we took over in 2010, had done a great job on that. We only had to tinker a little bit with that and carry on with the early childhood education curriculum. We have done a great job on the primary school curriculum, and on the secondary school curriculum, we have completed that as well, bringing in STREAM, which is science, technology, research, engineering, arts, and mathematics. So we want you to look at continuing that. We have no difficulty in you introducing a greater understanding of history and geography, which you promised in your manifesto, and we are in sync with you on that area. So the ministry, they said that they had every confidence that the teachers and principals are capable of supporting students for their holistic development through the implementation of the continuous assessment component. But you have stopped that. You have reverted it. Why have you stopped? I have a research done by EQ Review, Educational Quality in Developing World. And they said here, what are the benefits of continuous assessment? The continuous assessment process is much more than an examination of pupil achievement. Continuous assessment is also a powerful diagnostic tool that enables pupils to understand the areas in which they are having difficulty and to concentrate their efforts in these areas. Frequent interactions between pupils and teachers means that teachers know the strengths and weaknesses of their learners. In continuous assessment, teachers assess the curriculum as implemented in the classroom. It also allows teachers to evaluate the effectiveness of their teaching strategies relative to the curriculum. And different research work have shown how you need to resources, how you need to train. And let me bring to the attention of this House on that continuous assessment component, which included morals, values, ethics, citizenry development, character development, physical education, visual and performing arts, and agri-science, and health and family life education. We want you to look at that again, examine it, and don't scrap it just like that because you had a 2-day consultation. We had a 1-year consultation with 8 districts in Trinidad and Tobago and 2 national consultations before we came up with that new thing in the primary school curriculum. And in 2012, the Minister of Education in Singapore came out after meeting with all his principals throughout the country. He said he's bringing morals and values and ethics and citizenry development and character development into the education system. And we had already started that in Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker. The 8th report of the Joint Select Committee on Ministries, Statutory Authorities and State Enterprises, Group 1. They had the Ministry of Education before them in 2014. And that was on primary school education in the 10th Parliament. The committee concluded that the introduction of unconventional subjects such as visual and performing arts, physical education, and IT was an important move towards a more holistic approach to the development of children. And 3 public hearings were done. And I have some newspaper articles, Scrapping of CAC and Injustice. Creative thinkers need to be exposed to music, drama, dance, art, and physical education. These disciplines unlock the various recesses of the brain. They help in the social development of students who eventually become well-rounded, adjusted individuals in the future. Minister Anthony Garcia has been duped by a small group of people who have a tunnel vision of education. Minister, you have done a great injustice to our children. I want you, Honourable Minister, to look at that. CAC start of a better system. That's in a Guardian article on the, yeah. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the scholarships, he has reduced the scholarships. And why?
Minutes, Honourable Member.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We want you to examine why you have been reducing the scholarships. Take a critical analysis of it. We don't want you to think that there's bias in the award because that's one of the things you said. It's a very challenging time for you, but go back and give the scholarships based on meritocracy. We want you to look at the homework centers again, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Over 400 homework centers have been stopped. And that is an important aspect of the development of the children who are experiencing problems in schools. And it is not a costly exercise. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I close by saying that American President Thomas Jefferson once said that when a man assumes a public trust, he should consider himself a public property. He noted, the care of human life and happiness, and not their destruction, is the first and only object of good government. And he had especially emphasized the need for a government to educate and inform the whole mass of the people, for they are the only sure reliance for the preservation of our liberty. Those on the other side may want to seriously ponder on these words when considering their duties and responsibilities to the people of this country as they devise and execute their education program. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to support my colleague in saying that these measures that the education system is now putting, they are repressive, they are not taking care of our children and even our adults. This government needs to revise its policies, review its policies because of the harsh and damaging effect it has on our education process. And it is taking education back, regressing education to 20 years before when we completed in 2015. So we ask this government, look, investigate what is happening there, make some new policies, and make sure that the children and the adults are taken care with a better education system. Thank you very much.
I recognize the member for Moruga Tableland.
Good evening, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Good evening to the entire House on both sides. it is a pleasure and a privilege for me to participate in the debate on this motion, more so since it deals directly with the issue of education. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, I crave your indulgence at least for a minute, because I think it would be remiss of me as an historian, professionally, to not at least extend a sentence over the passing of the late Cuban leader. As an individual who has researched extensively and at one time taught courses on Latin American history, I think I would like it recorded in the Hansard that whereas we come from a different stream of history in the English-speaking Caribbean, in Latin America, given the fact that liberal democracy was often aligned with very brutal and despotic dictatorships, I call to mind Augusto Pinochet. Socialism, as it existed within that historical context, was often viewed as the emancipator of the common man, the only chance for the working class and the poor to progress. So when you don't understand that context and you use a very oversimplistic perception of that history, it's easy to view Castro as a dictator. But within the context of Latin American history, there are very palpable reasons why he's seen as a hero by millions of people, and that should not be discounted. I want to take a few minutes to respond directly to the contributions of my colleagues on the other side, both from Shogunas East and my favorite combatant, the honorable member for Caroni East. I listened intently and with interest to both their presentations. Both, in their own way and in their own realms, served as ministers of education. And I owe them the respect of treating their motion with respect, regardless of whether I believe that they have been hyperbolic or exaggerating. They are owed the respect, given their former posts, of treating what they've said with respect. But I want to respond critically to some of the things that they have asserted. I will start, of course, with my great friend, the member for Caroni East, who talked about a number of issues, and I took a note of them, so I'll respond to them in order. He almost ended by making reference to the continuous assessment component of the SEA exam, or as it's commonly known, the CAC, questioning, of course, our decision at the ministry to remove this component. Now, even before I got involved in politics, given that I am someone who has been involved in education for almost practically my entire adult life, someone who taught primary school for some 15 years, I was very confused as to why the Ministry of Education sought to impose on the education system an artificial second layer of continuous assessment. Education requires assessment continuously. So there is nothing wrong with the idea of continuous assessment. In fact, it is normative for schools to assess their students continuously. Students do weekly tests in school. They do monthly tests in school. They are tested at the end of every term. There is often a promotion test at the end of every year. So schools test continuously. It's part of their normal operations. I was very confused as to why you would want to add another system of continuous assessment on one that already functioned very effectively, which, of course, added a tremendous burden to the lives of the students and lives of the teacher, and which, honestly, was never required in the first place. So given that it was, in many ways, counterproductive and counterintuitive, and given that its intent, which was to help in the differentiation that is required for placing students after the SEA, as part of the SEA exam, it couldn't fulfill that purpose because the scores received by students were often so close anyway that it didn't really add any differentiation. The whole thing was tremendously pointless. So given the strain, given the fact that it served no real purpose, we had little choice. I mean, it was not a difficult choice to make to remove it. And it does not mean that as ministry, we do not understand the significance of continuous assessment. In fact, it's an integral part of our students' education, and I want to emphasize it was something that schools routinely did as part of their normal course of operations. So we are not against continuous assessment. We are against doing it artificially and counterproductively. That's one. I want to talk definitively about the UWI South Campus and to remove any dissonance from the mind of the public that we are somehow, for whatever reason, very much against the South Campus. I am not sure if the point was made strongly enough during the Standing Finance Committee part of the budgetary debate, but it really needs to be emphasized, and I will emphasize it now. The Ministry of Education is not fundamentally against the South Campus of the University of the West Indies. In fact, even though there is a direct relationship between government and UWI, UWI remains an independent organization. The funding required to complete the South Campus, and this is something that I am quite sure a member for Chaguanas East knows quite well, was already presented to UWI by the government, meaning that the University of the West Indies already has all of the funding required to complete the South Campus. It is not the case, as is often being bandied about, that the government is somehow just against the South Campus and we are withholding funding and therefore holding back the project. That is patently false. The University of the West Indies, and this can be substantiated by the principal, also by the vice chancellor, has all of the funding required to complete that project. So as to why that project does not seem to be progressing is not something that should be asked of the government. It is not something that should be asked of the ministry. It is something that must be answered by the University of the West Indies. Given that they have all of the funding, it is now an internal matter to be vetted and sorted out by them. We are not in any way, financially or otherwise, impeding the progress of the South Campus. I am making that abundantly clear to the Parliament and to the public, Mr. Deputy Speaker. My colleague, the member for Caroni East, spoke again, and he spoke with great passion about the laptops. I concur with him, as our government concurs with his former regime, about the importance of ICT in terms of the development of our students. It is now, ICT is almost virtually the lingua franca of this era. Anyone who is not educated, either directly or indirectly, with an understanding of ICT in its broader and its narrower sense, is really the recipient of a faulty education. There is no discussion on this side. There is no distraction on this side. There is no confusion on this side as to the importance of ICT to the development of our students. The only issue going forward is a discussion of how best to ensure they receive the kind of technological education that they require. The former regime chose to introduce a laptop policy. On one hand, it was expensive. On the other hand, it was implemented lacking much of the paraphernalia, much of the infrastructure required to be effective. And I'm sure I've said this before, but maybe it bears repeating. If you have a class of 35 students, each student has a laptop. in a classroom where there is no Wi-Fi, so they cannot access the internet, where there are no plugs that all of them can charge their laptops, what you have really given them is a very expensive tool that cannot be used in the instructional period. So it's not really in classroom time a teaching and learning tool. The majority of our secondary schools did not even have the Wi-Fi required to make the laptops teaching and learning paraphernalia. The former minister, Mr. Deputy Speaker, may have spoken about it, but it is only within the last year, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that we have concluded the process of providing internet to all secondary schools, so that now this kind of thing would actually be useful in the classroom. There is no point to giving students a very expensive piece of equipment that is to form a central part of their education if they cannot use it effectively during the instructional period, which is the period of teaching and learning. It was not the case. Added to that, unless one inhabits a bubble, one must be aware that the nation is facing very different economic circumstances. And the largesse that might be required to give every single child a laptop no longer exists. So, given the problems that were encountered with the laptop program, and I could go on, we have a laptop graveyard still at St. Clair, where the very mediocre laptops provided to students, they came to die because many of them were so poor that within a matter of months they broke down and they could not be fixed. And anyone who wants to see tangible evidence of that, I could take you to St. Clair anytime and show you a graveyard with 800 laptops that were given to students and within a year were no longer operational and were so mediocre that they could not be fixed. So the Ministry of Education has embarked on a new laptop policy that is quite different from the one that preceded it, and it is our intention to ensure that it is a success. Because the laptop policy or an ICT policy is not a conceit, it's not a gimmick, it's not something you do to win votes, it's something that you fundamentally do to ensure that our students get the kind of ICT education that they require. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm really hoping that at the end of this, we put this nowhere debate on the laptop policy to rest. My friend from Caroni East also spoke about school construction. And I would admit that this has been a bit of a bugbear for us going forward. But I want to make the point again, as I made during the budgetary debate. My colleague often stands and talks about the fact that he built 100 schools, which is a nice round figure. And as I said, Mr. Deputy Speaker, during the budget debate, I will reiterate again. I am not sure whether that is meant as an anecdotal figure, whether it's meant to be metaphorical, or whether it's meant to be literal. But I can say definitively that it is not a fact. It is not a fact that during the tenure of the previous government, 100 schools were built in Trinidad. It is patently untrue. In fact, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will suggest to you, that I might suggest to my colleague, that we go on a road trip through Trinidad to find these schools. And I will suggest to you...
You will pick them up, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'll be very honored and privileged to.
I would be happy to so go, but I am fearful that we will never be seen again because this journey would never end. Because, Mr. Deputy Speaker, there are no records at the ministry which suggest 100 schools were ever built.
I have it here. There it is.
Many of these schools, sir, exist nowhere but in the collective imagination of the former government. This is not a fact. And, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will make the point again, and I really do detest repeating myself. The member also spoke about 78 schools being under construction. The records of the ministry and the records of EFCL suggest that many of those schools exist at 1% construction, 2% construction. I don't know what 1% of a school is. Maybe you just go and turn the sod and you say that you're building a school. These things exist, so Deputy Speaker, mostly in the collective imagination of the honorable member for Caroni East. At best, we have been able, and I have had this substantiated over and over again. So I will say it over and over again. At best, the figure that would have been constructed during the former regime was 55, many of which were not completed. So I would like, just like this laptop debate that is going in a cul-de-sac, going nowhere in a circle, I would like to put this question or this imaginary figure of 100 schools to rest and relieve my honorable colleague of the burden of having to repeat something that cannot be substantiated. Thank you, sir. The member also spoke eloquently about the issue of school repairs. I will admit as well that that continues to be a problem. But problems, Mr. Deputy Speaker, have explanations. And the explanation for this one is quite simple. In economics, and the esteemed member for Shogunas East talked about EC 101. And he also talked about being a student of the School of Education. And if I were in the mood to tease him, I would tell him that I actually lectured there, and perhaps he is still a student. But I would give you some free lessons, but I'm not in a mood to tease. There is something called opportunity cost, and you can't spend the same money, sir, Deputy Speaker, on a number of different things. Meaning that if you have a grand design to build 100 schools without any identifiable funding, you cannot then use the same money to do repairs. So one of these reasons why it seems all of a sudden that we have all of these problems in terms of infrastructure at our schools is because the normal cycle of repairs and maintenance that would be done by the Education Ministry during each vacation period was allowed to go in abeyance because the effort and funding was being used to try to build schools. And if for 3 or 4 or 5 years you've neglected repairs on schools, many of which are 50 years, 60 years old, what you're going to reap at the end of that is a situation, Mr. Deputy Speaker, where a number of your schools have severe infrastructural problems. And if then you end up appointing contractors to do the same jobs over and over, with the same end result that a few months later you do the same jobs over and over, then you end up in a cycle going nowhere. So amongst a number of things we are doing at the moment, we are in the process of trying to put together a better system where we can go about ensuring that repairs are done on time, they are supervised, they are properly implemented, somebody signs off on them as having the requisite quality, and then we ensure that we don't go back and pay the same contractor to do the same job cyclically again. So I'm putting that to rest. I want to put forward to this Parliament as well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that during the tenure of the former regime, we faced a number of concerns, especially on the education side. If I were to praise my colleague from Chaguanas East, at least when I walked into what is now called the test division, I met sanity and order. I don't think Minister Garcia could say the same thing in the Ministry of Education. One of the problems we faced, a few weeks ago, I had a meeting with the IDB, talking about, because the member for Caroni East, I don't want to put you in that basket. The member for Caroni East talked a bit about quality and making qualitative changes and all of that. Had a meeting with the IDB because we are in the midst of trying to negotiate a new loan to fund some of the quality changes we want to make in education. And we emphasize and re-emphasize that instead of spending a lot of money building structures that we may or may not need, which may or may not change the quality of education we have, maybe we should spend money wisely and pointedly on things that could bring us a spike in terms of the quality of the system. And the IDB, interestingly, told Minister Garcia and I that during 2010 and 2015, and I know I talk quickly, so I'll actually say this slowly so everybody understands me. Between 2010 and 2015, Trinidad and Tobago was the worst performer in terms of the IDB loans in the Caribbean. The worst. Why? Because we often signed up for loans without any clear plans of what should be done or how it should be implemented. We ended up borrowing a lot of money that we could not use because there was no plan to implement, paying a lot of money back, not being able to use the money we borrowed, and we ended up in a colossal mess. Going forward, when we access a new loan, we intend to use that to make qualitative, real, fundamental, observable, measurable, qualitative changes. Yeah, trying my best. Really trying to talk slowly as opposed to the normal rattling off. And I hear the member for Naparima talking in my direction, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And during the parlance before, he kept shouting out the school name Cohen Hamilton, Cohen Hamilton, Cohen Hamilton, repeatedly. Now, it's interesting that he would do that because my brothers went to that Cohen Hamilton school, one of the two secondary schools in Moruga. And because of my experience and living in the community, I was aware that he was a member of that board for a number of years. And he would have had a direct relationship with that school while he was part of the government between 2010 and 2015. And I asked myself what was done in that period to improve the school, but I already know the answer. The answer is nothing.
Would you?
No, I would not.
Okay.
If I thought you would say something sensible, I would, but what point would that be? So, Deputy Speaker, so instead of shouting out Cohen Hamilton, the member should look to his conscience and what he did not do. Mr. Deputy Speaker, because I want to still treat seriously with the nature and the suggestion of the motion, I would like to take some time to allay the fears of the members on the opposing side, so we don't end up talking in a circle, arguing something that should not be argued when we could use the Parliament's time more wisely. And I will go back to the Standing Finance Committee part of the budget debate. And I will give the member, and this might never happen in life again, member for Chaguanas East, some credit. Never happen again, some credit. Because to be perfectly honest, he did speak to me about the potential about the potential peril facing a number of the tertiary education institutions in particular. And I do believe in giving someone their due. He did have a conversation, a discussion with me about the potential troubles facing them. What he was not aware of, and perhaps he may have forgotten the discussion we had, hence resulting in this motion today, was that I informed him that very early, when we received the yellow books, even before, we were aware that there were on paper, I emphasize the words on paper, what appeared to be drastic cuts to a number of institutions. in particular YTEP, in particular NESC, in particular MIC, I will add in UTT. What appeared on paper to be tremendously drastic cuts. Perhaps he doesn't recall that in the midst of our short conversation, I told him that A, we were already aware of what looked like drastic cuts on paper, that B, Minister Garcia and I, had already had meetings with a number of the heads of those institutions, because of course they get the figures as we do. And they are aware that they were facing what appeared on paper to be tremendous cuts, many of which would be, disastrous to their institutions. Those heads of those institutions formed a very quick quorum, and they came and they had meetings with myself and Minister Garcia at the ministry to inform us, in their own words, in their own way, what this would mean if these cuts were made real. That, of course, triggered a series of events. Both ministers then subsequently spoke with the Minister of Planning to get her to give a view on the potential of what these figures meant for each institution. Subsequent to that, given her guidance, we had a meeting with her and the Minister of Finance. Because of that chain of events, we were able to get some comfort in the sense that the Minister of Finance gave us the comfort that the government would not allow these institutions to fail, would not allow these institutions to collapse. Now, I'll make the point very clearly. Many of them had already begun to organize themselves to deal with what would be a very deleterious situation. YTEP, for example, and this is widely known in the public, had decided they would have no classes at all for the rest of the year, and they would start in January as a mechanism to ensure that they could stretch the funding as far as it could go. We, given the assurance from A, the Minister of Planning, and B, the Minister of Finance, we were able to give them, under their guidance, direct instructions. Those instructions were, as much as possible, cut out whatever areas of redundancy, cut out whatever areas of, to use a bad word, wastage, misuse of funds, excessive use of funds, be a little more frugal, a little more stringent, but as much as possible, operate as normal. Meaning, no closing down of centers, no cutting of classes, no cutting of students, no cutting of programs, operate as you normally would. Thus far, even though I will be perfectly frank with the Parliament and I will be so with the nation, some of them are still a little jumpy, a little antsy. They have followed the instruction, and I can give them a public guarantee that the government has no intention of allowing these institutions, which serve a very important educational role in terms of educating our young people, in terms of skill training, but also perform a very critical social function in terms of number of students who might otherwise be facing very marginal lives, equipping them with the skills required to live as good citizens. The government of this nation has no intention, Madam Speaker, to allow these institutions to falter, to fail, to close down, to become lesser than they are now. And in responding to this motion directly, I would like to give that assurance to the member of Chaguanas East and the member for Caroni East that the government has no intention of allowing these institutions to falter, and that, having discussed with you, as I honestly say I have, we were already in the process of attempting to deal with what was on paper a very deleterious and very disastrous looking situation. And we are giving the assurance that the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Planning will provide the support required to make sure, Member for Tabaquite, even if you are skeptical, to ensure that these institutions will not falter.
For Moruga Tableland, your 30 minutes have expired. You're entitled to 15 more minutes. Do you wish to avail yourself of that?
Thank you, Madam.
Please continue.
Thank you. Right. Madam Speaker, the member from of Tabaquite is seemingly skeptical. As well he might be, that's his choice. I am giving an assurance that can be in the Parliament, in the public, to the people. That can be verified going forward. I am not sure that your regime, sir, can say that. Moving forward, it is not our intention to allow these things to fall apart. But, Madam Speaker, I want to deal with the overarching argument that has been presented here this afternoon by members on the opposing side. It's an attempt to rewrite and reframe history, repackaged and presented with a very skewed perception. The idea is that somehow, in some way, at some time, and that time is today, and I suppose it's just now, the PNM has become the enemy of education, and somehow, in some way, at some time, and I suppose it's now, the UNC has become the champion of education. And that, Madam Speaker, is 10 tons of irony that could slam this whole parliament. Because there is no greater untruth, no greater misdirection than stating that. Because it should be well understood by every single person in this parliament on both sides, the individual on the bench, all of those who work around here, that the entire framework that constitutes education in this country, from which all of us have benefited, that allows all of us to sit or stand here in this parliament today, that framework was created by the PNM. Every single individual in this parliament, whether they wish to admit or not, whether they like it or not, whether they want to acknowledge or not, is the recipient of an education created, formatted, and formulated by the People's National Movement. And liking it or not liking it does not change the fact. For anyone to come here and lecture to members of the PNM about the importance of education is a bit of arrogance that stretches my incredulity to the limit and beyond. It's also a historical irony too trenchant to contemplate. The PNM has, as gospel, championed the cause of education for 60 years. And the PNM shall continue to champion the cause of education in this nation ad infinitum. And Madam Speaker, I could use a guy similar to my friend from Caroni East and call a number of statistics to verify that. Or I could speak a simple personal truth. This party and this government is in no way, by no stretch of the imagination, anti-education. In fact, I was very moved when the Prime Minister published his biography and he talked about the importance and significance that education has played in his development, because there's a very direct parallel in my life. It is now a popular conceit for politicians everywhere around the world to talk about the fact that they are, recipients or products of a very humble upbringing. In fact, the only person not to have said that within recent memory is Trump, because I suppose that's what, even he could stretch that truth. I am the most improbable member of this house today, because I am the son of two parents who never attended secondary school. My mother passed for Naparima Girls, which I have heard is a good school. But because of her circumstances and where she came from, Moruga, she had no chance of attending secondary school. And she never set foot one day in that school. My father is an engineering genius, but he was born in Moruga of humble means. And he never had a chance to attend secondary school either. But they ensured, when they had their three sons, that they worked very hard to afford each of us the education that they had never had a chance to receive. Consequently, when I began teaching, when I began lecturing, when I stand now as one of 2 ministers in a Ministry of Education, I treat this issue of education with seriousness that not even I, at times, understand. This is for me not just a calling, it is for me almost a crusade. Because today we exist in a nation where after the SEA exam, and we check the results, there are 3,500 students that cannot score over 30% in language and mathematics. In my mind, that's a travesty almost at the level of a sin. And if in my tenure here I do nothing to change that, then I would have wasted my time, the Parliament's time, and the people's time. And I have no intention of doing any of that. So when I stand here and I speak to the nation and the Parliament, and I give an assurance that YTEP, that NESC, MIC, UTT, UE, even Cohen and Milton that was underserved by the member for Naparima will not be allowed to falter. I don't do so as some sort of political conceit. I don't do so to win plaudits. I do so because education for me is absolutely a crusade, because if you come from a rural community and you come from humble means anywhere in this country, education is the one currency that allows you to change your life. And it happened for me. And I want that for every single child in similar circumstances. So, Madam Speaker, before going on like a recurring decimal and sounding like my friend from Naparima who says Singapore, 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 I will end by saying for this government, education is of paramount importance. We can talk and wring our hands about oil and gas over and over, but our most endearing resource remains the intelligence of our young people. And if we don't provide the purview and avenue for them to develop it, we are doomed as a nation. We cannot be. Education remains on the forefront of the burner of development for the PNM government. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Couva North. It means you have 8 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Because of my limited time, I would just get straight into the issues that I would like to highlight here this evening. And of course, we recognize the importance of education, as my colleague across said. We all do recognize the importance of education, but I must say that it is a fact that over the past 15 months, the government has cut down drastically with respect to funding, both to the Ministry of Education and Tertiary Studies in Trinidad and Tobago, to its detriment, I must say. One of the first issues I would like to flag for the Minister to deal with is that issue of the Montrose Viddick School and the plight that that school, the students, the parents, the teachers, and the staff has had to contend with over the past year and a half. Now, Madam Speaker, as early as October the 23rd, 2015, which was last year, I accompanied the PTA to meet with the Minister of Education at the ministry. Unfortunately, he wasn't present, and his technocrats and myself met with the PTA and teachers and staff of the school. And it has been a recurring problem, of course. It has been highlighted all over the media with respect to the difficulties at the Montrose Viddick School. And, Madam Speaker, I would like to make a plea to the Minister to please put some emphasis and focus on the Montrose Viddick School. I know for a fact that under the former government, we identified a parcel of land along the connector road in central Trinidad. I am also aware that the school has a promissory note for the land and they have applied for title. And I can safely say here this afternoon that the board has no problem if the government would want to construct, relocate, and start the construction of the school. At this point in time, it is the 3rd week students are away from classes, and that has been going on and off for the past year and a half. They have been out of school. We have tried on many occasions to relocate the students to other areas within the central district that would make it very accommodating to the parents. To no avail, of course, because just as recent as 2 weeks ago, the minister visited the school. They were promised a new venue for relocation until the end of the term, and I don't think that has materialized as yet. To the minister, that has not materialized as yet. So therefore, I'm really appealing on behalf of the entire school, the board, the PTA, to please put some focus on this school and to see what can be done in the quickest space of time. There's also another issue with the mites and all of that that has plagued the school, and what has happened over the past couple of months is that the school has been sanitized many times. They have done testing. Kariri has done testing, or they have sent the samples to be tested at Kariri. We were hearing on the media that there was no report with respect to that. So therefore, we are also asking whether or not, in the meantime, if there are no plans for relocation and construction of a new Montrose Viddick primary, whether or not there are going to be any sort of interim measure where the issues of the mite and the infestation of the pest and all of that can be dealt with in quick time. Madam Speaker, also, I would also like to flag an issue with respect to the Tobago ECCE teachers and where they are claiming victimization. And I just want to quote very quickly from the Express, Friday, December the 2nd. The early childhood care and education teachers in Tobago say that they are frustrated and fed up of the shoddy treatment meted out to them, including what they claim has been the denial to go on maternity leave. The president of the ECTTU said yesterday, despite repeated letters written to the Minister of Education and the Minister of Labour and to the Tobago House of Assembly officials under which the teachers fall, there has been no response with respect to these issues and the ECCA teachers. They are also flagging, Madam Speaker, the issue of their tenure of labor, and they're saying that they are permanent teachers, that they are not contracted, but the THA has forced a 6-month contract on them, which is illegal because there is no 6-month contract in early childhood rank. And the stipulations is that the contracts must be 3 years and up. And that is clearly stated in the agreement with the Chief Personnel Officer. So again, I'm appealing to the Minister of Education to please put some focus also in this area and the plight of the ECC teachers of Tobago. It is very, very important. And if it is what the member for Moruga Tableland stated, if he is very honest after his passionate contribution, that I am sure that as early as when we leave this chamber, he will be throwing a call across to Tobago to see how best he can assist those teachers across there. So, Madam Speaker, I have many other issues, but I don't have the time in which to contribute and to speak on them. But I would just really like to say that the government has really disappointed the population in terms of education, the focus on education. Students across the board, they have been complaining and protesting about non-consultation by the ministry, by the respective stakeholders with respect to GATE and tertiary education. And we know that there are going to be tremendous difficulty come early next year when it is that these stringent measures that were taken by the government with respect to GATE are going to be implemented. So we wait to see, and we are here, of course, to represent our constituents and the people of Trinidad and Tobago to the best of our ability, and we'll be watching on at the member for Arima and Moruga Tableland. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honourable members, leave having been granted, I now call upon the member for Cumuto, Manzanilla. And just before we start, just to remind, the speaking times, 20 minutes for the presenter, 20 minutes for the first minister to speak, 5 minutes for every other speaker, total time 60 minutes. Member for Cumuto, Manzanilla.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Trinidad and Tobago is very much at risk of wind and oceanic disasters that plague the Caribbean basin. Our eastern seaboard is most geographically exposed to the windward elements and has been devastated persistently by widespread flooding and landslides in last decades. In spite of numerous attempts to deal with this matter through the relevant authorities, the call for sustainable infrastructure remains unaddressed by this administration. Understanding this critical need for proper infrastructure, under the astute leadership of Kamala Prasad Bisesa, the PP government made this mainstay of focus by dredging rivers, constructing box drains and new irrigation canals in the affected regions throughout Trinidad and Tobago. And Madam Speaker, if I could recall, in 2010, when we came into government, the Honorable Prime Minister put on her Wellington boots and was in the central area because of severe flooding that had taken place. I think it was during the time that we were being sworn in. And the entire government, Madam Speaker, was on the ground, ensuring that the people received immediate relief. And so it set a precedent for a government to respond, not react, respond in a timely manner to the needs of its people. Not only in 2010, but in 2012, during the, I'm not taking him on, during the, when we won at the Javelin, Diego Martin had been severely affected as well. And it called for, and our Minister of Planning at that time, Dr. Botewari, worked assiduously on providing and putting in place the necessary legislative agenda to ensure that this type of flooding because of indiscriminate building will not occur ever again. And so it was brought into Parliament, and because of the fact that the government was able to recognize that there was a need for the proper infrastructure and legislation in place, we worked towards putting those things in place. Unfortunately, we never finished everything in time. Further to that, in 2014, Madam Speaker, we had severe flooding again in Manzanilla. And the reason why I'm going through all of this, I understand the constraints that the minister is experiencing. I know he has been in the eastern region for the past couple of days trying to bring relief. So I know that you're coming to tell me all the work that you have done. But you know, what work has been done, Madam Speaker, what I'm trying to bring here is that could have been prevented. Because we started, the PP started a program of proper infrastructure throughout Trinidad and Tobago. It was not in Central alone. It was all over. It was in Diego Martin. It was in Toco. It was in Valencia. It was also in the south and deep south region that this sustainable development infrastructure was being implemented. And it was because of the fact we understood that for many years this PNM government had neglected to put the necessary infrastructure in place. Under successive PNM administrations, there have been unprecedented flooding. Areas that never flooded before had seen flooding, and this have decimated a lot of areas. And I would bring the recent raging floodwaters that took place on the bus route. Madam Speaker, on the bus route, never before had we such horrific flooding that resulted in a fire officer being injured as a result. And so it shows that, you know, the PNM track record has remained the same throughout the years. There's a lack of planning. And I reiterate that it has been this trend under every PNM government, dating back when I was a child, Madam Speaker. I remember reading constantly in the papers and hearing on the news about floods all over Trinidad and Tobago, of landslips, of bridges washing away. And you know what was sad? I often heard the MPs at that time, particularly in the opposition constituencies, that they couldn't get their roads repaired. They couldn't get their bridges rebuilt. And why? Because it was of no importance to the government at the time. And you know, as recent, and I'm going back to the great floods, the great flood crisis of 2008, when Trinidad was underwater and several children died as a result. Some were either washed away by the floods or by landslips. And this is in the papers of Newsday, Sunday, the 23rd November, 2008. I'm not making up these figures or these things. These are facts I'm speaking about. And so this inability to respond by the relevant authorities, be it the ODPM, regional corporations, or whoever it is really indicative of the lack of adequate financing, resources, and equipment, as evident in the responses of Mr. Terry Rondon, the former chairman of Sandy Grande Corporation. Calling for mattresses, food, clothing, and water. And further to that statement by the MP for Toko Sandy Grande, up to midday today, complained of not reaching Matlot, of the slow response of food supplies and everything reaching. As a matter of fact, in the papers today, it was stated that up to yesterday midday, water, not even a bottle of water, had been delivered to the areas. And we understand that it may be difficult, but the point about it is that had the rivers been dredged, had certain amenities been put in place, if you have in each community the necessary programs in place to assist in disaster preparedness, then we would have an ability to cope with and have mechanisms to cope with disasters of this type. Trinidad and Tobago is in a hurricane pathway. In the last 3 decades, the numbers of hurricanes forming in the region per year has tripled from 1.5 to 4. Hurricane formation in the Atlantic has resulted in a near miss where storms turn northwards by the time it turns into a category 1. However, there is increasing evidence that these storms are forming at lower latitudes that will bring Trinidad and Tobago closer to its path. And why? This is as a result of climate change, an important factor that we must address as a nation. And therefore, it is important for this government to not just deal with the situation that has occurred in Matlot, but to look at it holistically and understand what it is that we need to do should a disaster that is triple times what has happened in Matlot occurs throughout Trinidad and Tobago. And I just want to bring an example. Yesterday I was going through my constituency, and day before yesterday I was going through, and the river was kind of low at the time, but there was a blockage. And when I called and I asked for assistance, they said, well, you know, all the resources have been sent to Matlot, all. And therefore, we are unable to dredge the river at this time. And I'm saying, you know, yes, we need to deal with X, but at the same time, if a heavy rain had to come again, or persistent rain, as what happened, you have to look at preventative measures as well. And this is what a proactive government needs to do, and they need to consider all actions as opposed to just focusing on one. In addition to that, TNT is in a high-risk earthquake zone, the Central Range Fault Line. Furthermore, in 2010, the U.S. Geological Survey revealed that Trinidad sits directly on top the Central Range Fault Line, which is an unstable, high-risk earthquake zone. And as such, the entire country is at risk of disaster. And I'm not saying this to frighten anybody. I'm simply saying this, that we must consider in our planning for every eventuality and take it and bring about a holistic approach to your planning, which I don't see. We are not seeing it. The people are not seeing it on the ground, certainly not in Matlot. The people who have suffered in other parts of the country, who have lost their homes, who have lost their crop and so forth, they are not seeing it. And therefore, it is important for you to consider sustainable development infrastructure, which must have a built-in mechanism of maintenance of resilience against surprises and shocks. In this case, the violent abundance of destructive waters. We must look at two things: flood control and flood relief. You know, I remember there was a hullabaloo when the honorable member for Tabaquite assumed the position. It was called a mega ministry, where he assumed the role of both Minister of Local Government as well as Works. And why? But what happened? He was able to collaborate and work at an infrastructure flood prevention plan in the entire country. I remember him going when he was called upon to look at rivers and to determine that they needed to be dredged. And he did so. He dredged rivers. And as a result of it, a lot of flooding that would have taken place ordinarily was mitigated. And as such, it is important to understand, you know, people used it against us, including the government. And they refer to us as the box drain government. You know, they kept saying, you're the box drain government, but you don't understand. Now you're going to go and build box drains now, Honorable Minister, because you understand how important it is. In my constituency, I could tell you, with the undulated land and how it shifts and so forth, you need to have proper infrastructure in place. And the box drains that were constructed during our tenure, I can assure you that a number of homes in the area have been saved as a result of it. The roads have been prevented from breaking and collapsing as a result. And so it is important that when you look at the landslides that are taking place throughout the country, it is as a result of a lack of planning from this current government. Because when we were in government, we were in the process of implementing throughout the country the proper infrastructure to reduce or to eradicate completely the problems of flooding. And then there's the issue of dams, Madam Speaker, and water retention ponds, which the PP government worked assiduously to plan and to construct. Dams and the associated reservoirs must be designed completely or partially to aid in flood protection and control. And so we started on that, Madam Speaker. Is this government intent on continuing that program? Are they intent on working with the programs that we had designed to ensure that there would not be any flooding? Because I'm asking, because everything that we have done so far, they have stopped. They have stopped everything because they have to audit, they have to check, there's corruption, but nothing that they can prove. And in the meantime, the people are suffering. And so this inability to respond by the relevant authorities is really very concerning, very concerning. There's so many other suggestions that we can make that can put in place, such as the Watergate flood barriers, which is a rapid response barrier. You have the diversion canal. You have the self-closing flood barrier. You have the river defenses. And you know, Madam Speaker, I remember I had written several letters. Whether it's to the Minister of Local Government, Minister of Works, and even to the corporation, asking for the rivers in my areas to be dredged. I've asked for, as a matter of fact, they in fact started to build, to reinforce the bridge right there just by my office. And Madam Speaker, would you believe that they have reduced the width of the river by 6 feet? 6 feet. And that can cause serious flooding. As a matter of fact, if we have another situation of persistent rain at all, we could have that entire bridge collapsing.
6 feet is a grave concern.
6 feet. I am not, it was wide and it's now half. and I've written asking, can you please deal with this? Why? Because it's important. I don't live in the area, but it's important to me because I represent a constituency. And as a result of it, if they are affected, I too am affected. And therefore, I'm asking the government, as you go out, as you're busy doing what it is you're doing, and I applaud you for that, do not forget that there is a preventative measure that must be taken into consideration. Since I came into office, Madam Speaker, I have begged, I have pleaded with the chairman of the regional corporation, please, sir, I understand that if an earthquake were to come and Kikem Jenny were to be affected, my constituency would be hit first by a tsunami. Up to now, I can't get a meeting. Up to now, I can't have a discussion as to the way forward. How can I help my constituents? How can I bring them to the forefront? Where is the high point that they can run to? Nothing like that. And so this has happened. This has happened. And as such, Madam Speaker, I'm taking the opportunity for the government to recognize, first of all, that they do not have a strategic plan. Because implementation is not a reactionary position, which is what is happening now. Implementation must include a strategic map, which identifies and maps the key ingredients that will direct performance. You know, Madam Speaker, in 2015, I sat right here during the budget, and I asked, because I saw that cut the budget in the local government, and I asked, what if certain things had happened? You know, how are we to deal with it? Well, we had a very smiling minister who indicated that, you know, well, if something like that happens, it'll be taken care of. But that's not the way it's supposed to be. That's reactionary. We're supposed to put things in place and plan so that we are not scampering for assistance. We're not looking to see what it is we can do and how we can do it. Maybe the new minister will take a different approach. I look forward to hearing your plans for the regional corporation. Again, on the 2016 budget, it was the same thing. There was a further cut to local government. As a matter of fact, the only thing that we saw was a recurrent expenditure. And I asked what would happen again. But you know what? Something has happened. And I'm asking the government that the proper measures, you know, a proper strategic plan be put in place to deal with disaster preparedness. They must have training, proper training. And yet throughout the budget, we saw cuts in training. Cut, 0, 0, 0. And so I just want to conclude with a little bit of time I have again, that as we go forward, we have recommendations. And the recommendations is, first of all, that you must establish a sense of urgency. We must have flood prevention efforts by dredging. I have rivers to be dredged right now. And I know it's not unique to me, to my constituency of Cumuto, Manzanilla. It's throughout Trinidad and possibly Tobago. We must have sustainable infrastructure, disaster and crisis planning, which must involve the community. The communities right now are reeling because they don't know where to turn, who to turn to. And so therefore, it must begin with the communities so that they can survive during a disaster, as what is happening now. You know, we must ensure that there's relief, so food supplies, medical, and aid. We must create guiding coalitions. We have a lot of NGOs that are waiting and are hoping, are trying their best, but we can't work together because the NGOs sometimes reside within the communities. And therefore, if we empower them, we empower an entire community in times of disaster. We must develop a vision and a strategy. And we must be able to communicate.
Honorable member, your speaking time has expired.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes. No, just the people's servant, not the big man. Madam Speaker, let me just say it's a pleasure to be making my first presentation in the lower house. And it's a bit unfortunate that I have to make this presentation while some of our burgesses and citizens are in disaster mode. However, based on the motion before us, I'm compelled to respond. Madam Speaker, the motion said the failure of the government to adequately address the very serious effect of severe weather on the coastal region of the northeast coast of Trinidad. And basically, that is all I want to speak about today. The member for Cumuto Manzanilla said a lot about dredging rivers and flooding on the east-west corridor and things like that. But I just want to focus on what happened in the last couple of days in the Toko northeast coast and what we have done to ensure that the population does not go away, believing the statement made that the failure of the government. Madam Speaker, it should be noted that the severe weather that we experienced was not only in the northeast coast. It was in a lot of the CARICOM countries. Barbados and Grenada also experienced that weather, and they too experienced severe flooding. Madam Speaker, I wish to point out, contrary to what the member for Cumuto Manzanilla said, the flooding was not as a result of the river course not being drenched. The flooding was as a result of severe weather, and some of the text messages that I got from the burgesses in the Toko area is the first time they have ever experienced that kind of weather. I mean, the weather was just unbelievable, and I just have some pictures here that I can show you of what actually happened. Yes, I do. What you're seeing here, members, is basically the mountainous regions on the north coast. The amount of rain that fell brought down so much of the terrain, the trees, the land, that they, no, but what it caused, all right, what it caused, all right, yes, I did seek permission. Okay, sorry. What it caused is a lot of trees actually went in to the water course. All right, this brought in a lot of silt as well, but it was not as a result of the rivers not being drenched. If anybody knows the rivers on that side, a lot of them are stone rivers. All right? No, well, I don't. All right, so the result of the flooding was not as a result of no desilting. So I want to put that on the table. Well, no, the flooding is not in your constituency. Well, no, the disaster is in the northeast coast. Member for Cumuto Manzanilla, your constituency is not the northeast coast. That falls in, that is in Miss Glenda Jennings' constituency, and that is why Miss Glenda Jennings, sorry, member for, is up in Magdala at this time. Okay? And that is where the disaster is. Madam Speaker, the member also said what it was the worst, let me just make sure I get this correct, it was one of the worst disasters to occur in Trinidad and Tobago. I am not going to say yes or no. However, if this was the worst disaster that ever occurred in Trinidad and Tobago, I would want to give credit to the Trinidad and Tobago Air Guard, the Trinidad and Tobago Regiment, the Ministry of Works and Transport, the Sangre Grande Regional Corporation, the Member of Parliament, Ms. Glenda Jennings, Mr. Terry Randon, the Council and Chairman, still and all the citizens in the Northeast Coast. Because if that was the worst disaster to hit Trinidad, the ODPM, and everybody who assisted, I just want to congratulate them, because the member said from the 30th of November, the area was cut off. Yesterday, which was the first, at 1 o'clock, we had access back into Matlock. And if within 24 hours, we could restore the roadway to make it passable for the trucks to get in, foodstuff to get in, water to get in, I think we need to compliment them on that. Yesterday, I could add yesterday, TNTech gave us the all clear that Grand River was back on the grid. They told us by Saturday, Matlot would be back on. However, I understand by this evening, Matlot should be back on. The water was restored in Grand River.
Serious?
Yes. This is WASA's report.
But she said not a drop of water.
No, that is the air guard. The air guard could confirm that they took in. Now, on the first couple of hours, water was a challenge, but they did take in water through the air guard. Okay, so water. I mean, come on, water in Trinidad. Okay. Also, WASA have once the TNTech lines are up in Matlot, the water will, WASA has automatically get their pumps and everything working. So, within 1 day, the Ministry of Works, with the assistance of the regiment and all the parties, were able to take the worst disaster that ever happened in Trinidad and bring back comfort to the citizens.
1 day, 24 hours.
I don't want to say this, well, yeah. So, I want to say that I want to compliment the staff to the Ministry of Work, because most of this work is being done in-house. All right, most of this work. I mean, normally when you have a disaster like this, we have contractors lining up on the doors. I give you the assurance that that is not happening, and we have access inside Matlot. In terms of the bridges, we have a Bailey Bridge in Matlot that is being settled right now as we speak. So we don't see any further problems, even if we get some more bad weather over the weekend. Yes, yes.
Teacher.
Madam Speaker, in addition, the Ministry of Works and Transport is preparing a comprehensive report in respect to the damage incurred to assist and will commence repairs in the planned structure approach in an effort to minimize any future inconvenience to the residents in the area. The Trinidad and Tobago Regiment will continue with its exercise with respect to final cleanup of the hillside with the assistance of the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, CPEP, and the Ministry of Works and Transport. Madam Speaker, it must be recognized that while we have no control of acts of God and natural disaster, we are duty-bound to put things in place to provide the necessary assistance to those affected by this event. Most important, Madam Speaker, the ministry is assessing the infrastructure that is needed to eliminate or reduce the damage where such acts of God, such as abnormal downpour, more than high gust winds and flooding occur. The ministry understands the plight and hardship of those suffered in the Matlot and other areas affected. The ministry is also undertaking a holistic nationwide approach to implement solutions that will reduce the risk of damage and destruction when these excessive, unusual, severe weather conditions come to our shores. Madam Speaker, I want to give this Parliament the assurance that the government, led by Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley, will leave no stone unturned to bring relief to the people of the Matlot area. And I just want to ask the politicians, as I have asked the contractors in the Ministry of Works, when we have disasters, we should not try to benefit from them. And I want to ask the politicians that when we have disasters, that we don't make it a political scenario. If we could do that and we could work together, I give you all the assurance as the Minister of Works, whatever happened in any of your constituencies, I'll be there just as fast as I was in Thank you.
Member for Tabaquite.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, let me begin by identifying with the plight of the people of Matlot and the adjoining villages in terms of what they have suffered. And let's hope that lives can be returned to normalcy in the quickest possible time. I understand the nature of disaster because the minister lives very closely to where the Manzanilla road was washed away. And he would tell you that while I was Minister of Works, in a very short time, in fact in 39 days, we rebuilt that entire roadway and got it going and got movement and so on. So I understand what is being said. Now, severe weather conditions are possible in any part of the world, and it's possible here in Trinidad. But the question is how prepared we are as a government, firstly, to prepare people to deal with disasters. And that, to me, is part and parcel of the role of the ODPM. And over, the ODPM, in my view, has been failing miserably in the role that they should really be playing in preparing people. You see, we can talk about preventative measures. You can work to prevent disasters. Maybe we have ignored afforestation in that area of the country. And if we had a proper reforestation program, maybe that would have been able to control some of the flooding. And secondly, how do we arrange the conditions such that agencies responsible, just like the Ministry of Works, as you're saying, but other agencies respond effectively and efficiently? Now, in that particular area, two things I'm concerned about. Firstly, that is a remote and rural part of the country. And therefore, to move equipment and move supplies and so on very quickly into that area is going to be difficult because the only way you have to get in there is by sea, if you can't get in by otherwise. And I want to recommend that we identify those high-risk areas. While we do all the other things, the afforestation and what have you, clean the rivers and whatever you can do, and build warehouses that will have adequate stocks and supplies, whether it is food that's non-perishable, and especially equipment like generators and what have you, so that when something happens like this, very quickly you can use those generators or other kinds of equipment that even the people in the villages can help themselves. Whether it's to cut trees across the road, you can have power saws and so on available. And I think that is something that must be considered for places like Matlot and Toko and what have you. The other point I want to make is that I find it strange that the meteorological services were not able to alert people in that area as to what was going to happen. We have, well, to the extent that people would take it seriously, right? So we have a place up in La Satal, which is a weather station, which is there for that purpose. To what extent did the meteorological services really use communication systems? Use the police station in Matlot to convey to the people, use microphones in the area. To what extent is the meteorological service communicating with the people so the people understand? And this is why I say, Minister of National Security, that ODPM is not doing the job it should do. ODPM should be in those kinds of areas, ODPM should be there educating people and preparing them to deal with disasters, and that's not happening. But I have 5 minutes, and I don't think I have very much more, but I want to raise the whole question of the meteorological services and the connection. I also want to ask the government at this point in time, what are you going to do in terms of helping people reconstruct their houses? When disasters occurred while we were in office, I would remember Mr. Surujrattan, the then head of the self-help program, within 10 to 12 hours, he will respond there. And 2 days after, there was material or check in the hand of people, and they were able to begin to reconstruct their lives. What are you going to do with the fishing community? How are you going to help them get their boats back into order, their boat repairs? What are you going to now improve in terms of the communication system? What are you going to help the farmers? I saw pictures with guys saying all his okra done, all his crops done, and what have you. And finally, Madam Speaker, the matter of University of the West Indies. What are they doing in the University of the West Indies to conduct the kinds of studies in areas like those that could help us to bring research material to improve the entire management of the ecology of that area, to understand the rock structures and so on in those areas, so that we can respond more effectively as a country and administrators and government to that. Having said that, Madam Speaker, thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. New paradigm for 5 minutes, so I'll be very quick. I thank the honourable members for raising this motion and for the privilege to contribute in a very succinct way. If I could just say, Madam Speaker, in answer to the points last raised by the member for Tabaquite, I'm very pleased to say that the government views local government reform as the key mechanism to achieve the very things which are required in incidents such as this. It is the need to remove the central government structure, locate it into the local government structure, move away from the concept of rural versus urban and just have local government deliver, that has been driving the holistic plan which the member for Cumuto Manzanilla asked for. So far from there being no plan whatsoever, there's a very comprehensive plan, because an Abercrombie Street office in Port of Spain cannot deliver to Matlot with the immediacy that is required unless there is that form of reform. And I'm very pleased to say, Madam Speaker, that the legislative and operational structures to put that into place are very far advanced. The honourable member raised the issue of warehouses, of communications, what the ODPM is doing. Let me say, Madam Speaker, with a government such as this investing in a highway in the northeast area, putting, as Cabinet has approved, a fire station into the Eastern District for the first time, manning it with auxiliary and full-time services for fire services such as this Cabinet has done under the Minister of National Security, approving disaster centres as has been done by this Cabinet under the Keith Rowley government for the first time ever, so that we don't have to store mattresses in the home of Winston Gypsy Peters, but rather instead at approved warehouses, as has been approved. That is the manner by which we deliver. And I'm very pleased to say that we have in fact installed and put into place the very things for the first time in this country that the honourable member has just raised. I'd like to mention quickly on the position of the box drain, etc. The honourable member for Cumuto Manzanilla spoke about a criticism of a box drain government. It was far from the fact that the opposition, now government, criticised the concept of a box drain. What we criticised and still criticise was the cost of the box drain that was involved. You see, Madam Speaker, when you add the off-balance sheet expenditure together with the $287 million that was spent by the last government, that equals to close to $400 million of expenditure. That is loans, on balance sheet, off balance sheet, together with the $287 million in expenditure. That's what we spent by the last government. In fact, that equals to almost 15 years of back-to-back PNM governments for the years prior. If you took every PNM allocation for 15 years prior to 2010, you have not reached the level of expenditure we saw in 5 years. And what that means is that that level of expenditure has certainly not prepared us for what Cumuto Manzanilla called the worst natural disaster in Trinidad and Tobago. And if dare I say, the worst natural disaster, as Cumuto Manzanilla put it, was dealt with 1 day of operationality, 24 hours by the Minister of Works and Transport. I wish to signal a loud and profuse thank you to the Honourable Minister of Works and Transport for marshalling the public service and the security services of Trinidad and Tobago, every man, woman, and child that has assisted in this venture, so that one day's action could result in the kind of relief that we've seen. Madam Speaker, I wish to certify that the government's plan, the holistic view, is very certain, and the minutiae details of development into the rural areas is a mainstay plank so that all of Trinidad and Tobago would have the same service and delivery. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Couva South.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, at this hour in making a very short intervention. And I too want to join my colleague in empathizing with the people of Matlock and environs in relation to what has transpired and how it has impacted upon them and the effects and so on, and the attempts to bring back a normal situation into their respective homes and so on. And I would have never expected the Attorney General to stand up at a time when people are suffering, people are inconvenienced and so on, to attempt to make heavy politics and weather out of this particular situation. Again, it reflects the insensitivity of the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago in addressing people's issues. And he comes on to speak about the issue of local government reform and connecting communities and so on. I want to ask the Attorney General here this evening, could you tell the people of Matlock and environs how will they benefit going forward from this local government reform that you are touting and you campaign on? With, allow me to talk. You could bully who you want, but you wouldn't bully Indarsingh when I am on the floor. You had your turn.
Member,
understand?
member, move on, please.
Right. Yes, Madam Speaker, coming back to the very issue, he will not tell the population of Trinidad and Tobago how they fool the people as it relates to local government reform, because in addressing this particular issue, we have been told going forward that local government reform will be on the front burner. But the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development still continues to exist. From a financial point of view, how will the Sandy Grande Regional Corporation benefit in 2016-2017, the financial year, in relation to addressing the plight of the people of Matlock and environment? That is what you should have been saying here this evening. I have no problem with the Minister of Works coming here and bringing back connectivity from the point of view of the roadway and the restoration of electricity and so on. These things are commendable. I commend all the officers of the various arms of law enforcement and so on who would have been involved in this particular exercise. But it is important to Minister of Works, if some timelines and so on could be established. I don't know how many bridges have collapsed. I don't know what will be the duration of the road restoration and so on. But it is important that these things are told to the national community and also the cost implication to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But importantly, my colleague addressed some very important issues in the context of the operation of the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, and also the role of the Meteorological Office, and also the whole question of the establishment of warehouses and so on. And at the end of the day, if you all want to advance the empowerment of communities and so on, and you want to advance the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, we must be told in a very clear-cut manner what will be the way forward. At the end of the day, the Ministry of Finance is still in charge of releases, and what will be the process of the real devolution of power. We were told, and don't make facial expressions and so on, we were told that you all were going to abolish the Ministry of Rural Development and so on, and the whole devolution of power and the releases of money and what we would call reducing the role of central government and giving the real autonomy to the regional corporations and so on will come. But in 2017, that is not on the horizon because, again, Attorney General, you speak about a legislative agenda. And of today, the people of Matlot, as I speak here, they do not know how their lives will be transformed.
Couva South. Member for St. Joseph.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for this unexpected pleasure. It is frightening to know that there's none so deaf as those who don't listen. The member for Couva South wants to know about local government reform and the revenue streams. We have said on many occasions that the legislative framework will come to the Parliament by the second quarter of 2017. That is when you will have the devolution. We have said it on numerous occasions how the revenue streams will be collected. The Honourable Minister said, and you asked, how many bridges fell down? The Minister said one bridge, and it is currently being reconstructed. A Bailey Bridge is being reconstructed. Why this propensity to keep misleading Trinidad and Tobago when the Minister said clearly one bridge which the member for Tabaquite built collapsed? And he said clearly that the bridge is being replaced. But let me go back to this. If this is the worst natural disaster to hit Trinidad and Tobago, and we could have access back within 24 hours and water within 36 hours, I think everybody concerned should be warmly congratulated. Warmly congratulated. But in the last few minutes, people are asking, what is your plan to deal with natural disasters? One of the plans to deal with natural disasters in that part of the country, which you neglected, was is now the building of a new Sangre Grande hospital. Because heaven forbid, if people were injured, where would they have gone in a natural disaster? And in our budget presentation, we clearly said one of the plans for Sangre Grande and for that area is the building of a new Sangre Grande hospital. So if you had a natural disaster, there is not only about reconnectivity, it's not only about water, it's not only about electricity, it's also about medical care. So the plan is there. The local government reform plan is there. The new road is there to give alternate routes, alternate access. And there is a plan. But if people are blind to the plan, we can't help that. But local government reform will bring a level of relief to rural communities like Toko, Matlot, Grand River, that is unparalleled in this country, where resources will now be put in the community to treat with these. So you don't have to leave Port of Spain, have a minister take a helicopter to leave Port of Spain from central government to go up to Matlot to see about a Matlot issue, which can be handled if you have a progressive corporation under the banner of local government reform with the legislative framework to give them the authority and the autonomy to do what they have to do in a local community. And that is what this is about. But the UNC can't help but politicize a natural disaster and twist it for political gain. So in 24 hours, normalcy has been restored. In the worst natural disaster, according to Cumuto, Manzanilla. Madam Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity.
Leader of the House.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move that this House do now adjourn to Wednesday, the 7th day of December, 2016 at 1:30 p.m. Madam Speaker, at that time, we will deal with motion number 1 under government business.
Honorable members, the question is that this House do now adjourn to Wednesday, the 7th of December 2016 at 1:30 p.m. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. This House now stands adjourned to Wednesday, 7th December 2016 at 1:30 p.m. I'm on my legs. This House now stands adjourned to Wednesday, 7 December 2016 at 1:30 p.m.